Dear students of class 8A and 8B, I am going to teach you on the following points mentioned in the board. First one, conquest of Punjab. Second one, Treaty of Amritsar. Third one, First Anglo-Sikh War. Fourth one, Second Anglo-Sikh War. Fifth, Treaty of Lahore. And sixth, doctrine of lapse. These are the following 6 points. As per these following 6 points, I am going to teach you. Now all of you open your books, open at page number 83. First point, conquest of Punjab. Conquest of Punjab. You know, the Sikh region became very powerful under whose leadership? Under the leadership of Ranjit Singh, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Sikh kingdom reached to its highest extent under the leadership of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. He signed a treaty between himself and the British in the year 1809. And under the terms of the treaty, it was decided that the British did not allow, he would not allow the company to interfere in the affairs of the Sikh kingdom. Under the terms of the Treaty of Amritsar, it was decided that the Sikh, under the leadership of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, would not allow the British to interfere in the internal political crisis or internal political affairs of the Sikhs. But soon after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the British decided to take part in the internal politics of the Sikhs. How? Because a war of succession broke out after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and hence the Sikh kingdom faced political instability. And due to political instability, due to political crisis in the state of the Sikhs, the British decided to take advantages. How? This opportunity gave the British a very good chance to attack the Sikh kingdom and expand the territory, their empire in India. As a result of it, the British had to declare 2 wars against the Sikhs. These 2 wars were known as First Anglo-Sikh War and Second Anglo-Sikh War. The First Anglo-Sikh War and the Second Anglo-Sikh War. First Anglo-Sikh War started in the year 1845 and continued for 1 year, and Second Anglo-Sikh War started in the year 1848 and continued for 1 year, means ended by 1848 to 1849, and first one 1845 to 1846, the first Anglo-Sikh War and the second Anglo-Sikh War. Now, what was the result of it? The two Anglo-Sikh wars were fought between the British and the Sikhs. Now, what was the result of the 2 Anglo-Sikh wars? What were the consequences of the 2 Anglo-Sikh wars? Number 1, the Sikhs were defeated in the first Anglo-Sikh War. And because of their because of their weak leadership, because of the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh and his strategy of war was fantastic, and he did not allow anyone else to defeat Sikh forces, because he made Sikh forces very powerful. All the Sikhs became very much powerful. The Sikh forces became very much powerful, and he always motivated the soldiers before any war. And as a result of it, the British forces fought bravely and the British remained silent. But still, in the year 1809, the Treaty of Amritsar was signed in between Maharaja Ranjit Singh and British East India Company. Under the terms of the Treaty of Amritsar, the British were not allowed to take part in the internal politics of the Sikhs. So the British remained silent, but suddenly Maharaja Ranjit Singh died, and because of his death, the British availed themselves of the golden opportunity and took part in the internal politics of the Sikhs. To do it, they declared two wars: the Anglo-Sikh War, the first Anglo-Sikh War, and the second Anglo-Sikh War. The first Anglo-Sikh War was held in the year 1845 and continued till 1846, and the second Anglo-Sikh War was held in 1848 and continued till 1849. Now the result is the Sikhs were defeated by the British East India Company, and ultimately a treaty was signed. The name of the treaty was Treaty of Lahore, and according to the terms of the treaty, the Sikhs had to part with two-thirds of their kingdom two-thirds of their kingdoms along with the territory extending from the Beas to Satluj rivers. And Sikh army was restricted. Sikh army was reduced to 20,000 cavalry and 12,000 infantry and a British resident at their court. And this it was decided that very British resident was stationed at Lahore at the cost of whom? At the cost of the Sikhs. Soon after, the second Anglo-Sikh War was held. Soon after, the second Anglo-Sikh War was held in the year 1848 and continued for how many years? Continued for only 1 year. It was ended by 1849, the second Anglo-Sikh War. It led to the total annexation of the last independent kingdom and powerful independent kingdom of India by the British in the year 1849. Almost all parts of the Sikh kingdoms came under the control of the British East India Company by the year 1849, my dear students. Now, next point, the Treaty of Lahore. The Treaty of Lahore was signed in between the Sikhs and the British East India Company. The British East India Company weakened the Sikhs, their military power, and ultimately the Sikhs became the Sikhs who were once a very powerful rulers of India, they were weakened. The British weakened them by defeating two battles in First Anglo-Sikh War and in Second Anglo-Sikh War. And ultimately, almost all parts of the Sikh kingdom came under the control of the British by the year 1849. Meanwhile, Lord Dalhousie became the Governor General of India. East India Company sent him as the new Governor General of India. on being the new Governor General of India, Lord Dalhousie adopted a new policy. The name of that policy was Doctrine of Lapse. Doctrine of Lapse. This was a policy adopted by Lord Dalhousie. Now, what is the Doctrine of Lapse? What do you mean by the Doctrine of Lapse, and why? Why was it adopted by Governor General Lord Dalhousie? Doctrine of Lapse was another policy of expansion, like the policy of subsidiary alliance, which was introduced by Lord Wellesley. In the same way, Lord Dalhousie also decided to extend British territory without, spilling any blood or without declaring any war against the local rulers, Indian regional kingdoms. That's why that very policy was introduced by Lord Dalhousie. The name of that policy was Doctrine of Lapse. Doctrine of Lapse. According to Indian tradition. Now, what was the system of the Doctrine of Lapse? According to the Indian tradition, the kings could adopt a heir to the throne. The kings could adopt a heir to the throne if they did not have their own male child. But the doctrine did not recognize the right of the adopted children to inherit the throne. Why? Because the British wanted to capture the states only by taking the weakness of the Indian rulers. Under the Doctrine of Lapse, if the ruler of any dependent state died without having his own male heir, then the kingdom would pass into the hands of the British. That means the kingdom would come under the British control. Thus, the Doctrine of Lapse was a method introduced by Lord Dalhousie, strengthened the British influence in Indian subcontinent, through which the British could acquire more territories in India without declaring any war. That's why the policy, the Doctrine of Lapse, a number of Indian priestly states, their grievances reached England, because a number of Indian priestly states were also annexed under the terms of the Doctrine of Lapse. Some of them were Satara, which was annexed by the British in the year 1848, and next one Nagpur in the year 1854, and third one Jhansi in the year 1854. So these were the three important states of India, annexed by the British one by one under the terms of the Doctrine of Lapse. The policy led to widespread discontentment and resentment among the Indian people, Indian rulers, towards the British, and was one of the factors that led to the revolt of 1857, my dear students. The revolt of 1857 was held only because of the grievances of the Indian rulers, only because of the resentment of the Indian rulers against their expansionist policies. The first one was introduced by Lord Wellesley. The name of that policy was Subsidiary Alliance. So many Indian rulers had to leave their independence for the Britishers, and the Britishers annexed their territories forcefully, mercilessly, by misguiding them. Similarly, Lord Dalhousie's Doctrine of Lapse also was another effort of the Britishers, without declaring war, without spending money. They captured almost all the states of India and as a result of it, the Indian rulers, the princely states, and their resentment created nationwide dissatisfaction among the Indian people. The Indian people, they also were disturbed. They also grew offended against that expansionist policies of the British. In 1857, my dear student, Rani of Jhansi, Lakshmi Bai, rejected this policy and waged a war against the British East India Company. How? Because she did not want to allow the British not to recognize her adopted son Anand Rao. After the death of her husband, one Hayar was adopted to the throne of Jhansi. But the British, under the system of the doctrine of lapse, did not recognize the did not recognize the right of the adopted son of Rani Lakshmi Bai to her throne, Jhansi. It gave Rani of Jhansi a great resentment. Rani of Jhansi grew offended and decided to raise her sword against the British East India Company. As soon as she came to know that her adopted son would not be allowed to the throne by the British under the policy of the doctrine of lapse, she immediately raised her sword against the British and declared war against them. She declared war in order to save Jhansi from being annexed by the British. Ultimately, Nana Sahib, the adopted son of Baji Rao too, also raised hue and cry against the system of the doctrine of lapse, because under the system of doctrine of lapse, her right to the throne after Baji Rao too was not recognized by the British. Even on the contrary, her pension was stopped by the British. The pension amount which was paid to him by the British was stopped, and as a result of it, Nana Sahib also fought against this policy. Nana Sahib collected soldiers and decided to fight against the British in protest against the system of the doctrine of lapse, my dear students. So, up to this, my dear students, next day I shall discuss the remaining part, and before I complete today's teaching, I would like to analyze the points which I taught you from the beginning to the last. Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Sikh ruler, signed a treaty named the Treaty of Amritsar. Under the terms of the treaty, Maharaja Ranjit Singh refrained the British from entering the internal politics of the Sikhs. The British remained silent, but suddenly Maharaja Ranjit Singh passed away. After his death, after Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death, the British noticed that there was a war of succession for the throne of the Sikh kingdom among the Sikhs. They decided to take part in the internal politics because Maharaja Ranjit Singh was no more, and the terms of the Treaty of Amritsar was of no use. That's why they decided to take part in the internal politics of the Sikhs. This resulted in grievances, discontentment, resentment among the Sikhs. As a result of it, the British had to declare two wars against them. The first Anglo-Sikh War, which was held in the year 1845 and continued till 1846, and second Anglo-Sikh War, which was held in the year 1848 and continued till and ended by 1849. By defeating the Sikhs, the British and the Sikhs, the Sikhs signed a treaty, the Treaty of Lahore, and under the terms of the Treaty of Lahore, almost all parts of the Sikh kingdom came under British control. Meanwhile, Lord Dalhousie came as the new Governor General of India and introduced a new expansionist policy. The name of the policy was the Doctrine of Lapse, my dear students. Under the system of the Doctrine of Lapse, almost all parts of the Indian states, including, princely states, came under British control. Satara, Nagpur, Jhansi came under British control. Rani of Jhansi, Lakshmi Bai, challenged the authority of the British, raised her sword for them, but she was defeated and ultimately killed. So Jhansi also came under the control of the British East India Company under the terms of the Doctrine of Lapse. Up to this, my dear students. Thank you.